From the grind to the glory, one man's journey proves that heart, hustle, and determination change the game. This is Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr., where adversity is met head-on and champions are made. Here's George.
Welcome to Catch as Catch Can. I'm George Tinsley Sr., former professional athlete, entrepreneur, author, and your host. This is a space where we sit down with leaders who face real challenges, learned real lessons, and kept moving forward.
Turning obstacles into opportunity.
Welcome. We have Robert Haar with us today, an award-winning franchise broker, recognized as Rookie of the Year and ranked among the top 10 brokers nationwide. With more than 25 years of experience working with executives in pharmaceuticals, hospitality, and services, he has guided professionals towards wealth and independence through franchise ownership. As president of Best Franchise Options, LLC, Robert focuses on aligning candidates' goals with the right franchise system, creating clear paths to ownership built on integrity and trust. He is committed to researching market trends and fostering lasting relationships that extend well beyond the awards of a franchise. Robert, welcome to the podcast today. We're glad to have you.
I appreciate you having me, George. Happy to be here today.
Good. Well, as you know, this is Catch as Catch Can, a nice way of saying turning your obstacles to opportunities. And so our audience today, we want to let them know how you, as a successful franchise broker, have been able to reach your goal at this particular point. So we'll delve back into some of your early beginnings just to kind of get a shape of how you started and how you got to where you are today. So my first question to you is, what inspired your journey into franchise brokering and entrepreneurship?
So I always say I've kind of I engineered my career and my life almost backwards, right? So I started off out of college, and actually just at the tail end of my college career, starting and owning a business, my own business through entrepreneurship. Didn't have anything to do with franchising, and I caught the restaurant, the food and beverage bug very early in my career. And so I decided, well, it would be a good idea to open and operate my own restaurants without any help from anybody, just going it alone, figuring it out as I went. And so a lot of lessons learned during that time period. And I always say, wow, if I knew now what I knew then, I never would have done it that way. But certainly probably would have done things a little differently as well. But I wouldn't change anything. You know, it was just true entrepreneurial spirit without the guidance of a franchisor mothership guiding you along every step of the way. It kind of shaped who I am today, for sure.
Well, that's very interesting. And we'll get back to that because I find that very, very interesting that you got started right out of college into your own restaurant. But tell us about where this all began. Where'd you grow up?
So born and raised in New York, out in Long Island, and moved to Westchester, went to high school there, played a lot of sports. I never reached your level of success when it comes to sports. I was a pretty good high school athlete, but I knew my limitations. So born and raised in New York, and then went to college up in Boston over at Northeastern University. And that's a cooperative education program. So it was you work and you go to school alternately. And so you kind of learn and you gravitate towards whatever craft or skills you wanted to hone. And for me, I caught that restaurant bug very early and was aligned with and worked for a restaurant consulting company there for a couple of years. Then decided, you know what, I know enough. I'm going to go out and do this on my own and let's go. You know, young and naive and as stupid as it was, I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard a lot of those same stories, mindsets of young folks getting into business. You mentioned Long Island, excuse me, as to where you grew up. I actually played in the American Basketball Association, which I played with the New York Nets out there on Long Island back before they became today the Brooklyn Nets. So, and of course, Julius Erving is from right there in Long Island. So
you probably crossed paths with Dr. J.
We played together. I'm a little bit before him, and so when he was with Virginia, the Virginia Squires, which was prior to New York, I was playing in Miami, down in the Miami Floridians. It was then, which later became now the Miami Heat. So that's how far back we go. But those were some exciting times. So,
yeah, he's one of the best. Dr. J was one of my favorites growing up.
Yeah, Roosevelt. All right, Roosevelt High, Roosevelt area.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I don't want to take too much of this time. But we played at Nassau Coliseum. Prior to that, we played at another arena where they had one shower that we all had to rotate and get through that shower. By the last ones going through, there was cold water.
Yeah, sure. You got a stopwatch on you.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember Laverne Tart, but he was the star of the team back in those days. Bill Melchione, they were, the stars at that particular point. Bill stayed around for a long time. But you grew up there and you went to a cooperative, the college education, and that's where the restaurant industry you caught that bug. So tell me where this led to your first.
Yeah. So I always say I bleed ketchup. If you cut me, I'll bleed ketchup. And so, I met my wife in Boston while I was in college, and she's from the Great Northwest, Seattle area. And I knew I wanted to open a restaurant, and she thought it'd be a good idea for her to take me out to Seattle. But, she was very smart about that. She only took me out there when it was summertime. And if you've never been to the Northwest, summertime is really the only time, as far as I'm concerned, to visit that region. The weather is spectacular. And so I remember on one of the plane trips, either going or coming back from Boston to Seattle, visiting, looking at homes and real estate, I started writing out some mock menus. And I always decided, well, I want to open up a deli, a delicatessen, and it's not something that Seattle has at the time. And after about 6 pages of this mock menu, I said, you know what? I think we got to go with something a little more simple. And so we landed on one of the staples in the American diet, which is pizza. And so I was my first restaurants. I actually got lucky. So I had the opportunity to take a little space over in an city called Redmond, Washington, which, if you don't know what put Redmond, Washington on the map, it was right down the street from a small company called Microsoft. And I was lucky enough to be located in their shadow going back a few years, and was able to get to be one of their preferred caterers and vendors, and was quite a hit with Microsoft employees. And so from there, we opened up another location and then another location. And then I said, boy, this is a lot of work, and started selling them off. And then went back to corporate America and started working for large franchise restaurant chains, which you might be familiar with, one called Red Robin International and another called Einstein Brothers Bagels. And so I kind of honed my knowledge base, how to run a restaurant properly. And so that's why I say I always reverse engineered my career. I started as an entrepreneur. Now, I was also able to win 2 international recipe awards for 2 of my original pizza recipes, and got flown into Las Vegas a couple of times and presented my pizzas to a panel of judges for the running of Pizza of the Year. I never won Pizza of the Year, but I did win my category twice, which is pretty good. My 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. that you were up to 3 restaurants at the time when you started selling them. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the funny thing is the first one by Microsoft, it wasn't for sale. I was there one afternoon and a business broker came in and said, "Can I speak to the owner?" And I went up to the front and she said, "I have somebody that wants to buy your restaurant." I said, "Oh, you do? Okay. It's not for sale." And so I guess the adage, everything's for sale at the right price, was applicable here for me.
Yeah.
And then once we sold that one, the others followed suit pretty quickly after that. And I said, "You know what? I got to get a job." So that's how I landed at Red Robin.
So your experience really in the restaurant business where you started was in the Seattle area, not New York. You were out in that area as you began. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say my pizza skills, my pizza taste was honed in New York, right? Because us New Yorkers, we're the connoisseurs of real pizza, right?
Right.
So,
Right. So when you mentioned pizza, I was kind of relating to New York versus the Starbucks coffee and what all goes on out there in Seattle. Starbucks licensee also, and have been out in the area visiting the corporation, prior to getting into it. So I had a chance to look at the area out there, in Seattle. So given those lessons that you learned while developing, and which I would say that if you opened 3 restaurants, you had a pretty good skill set there. And obviously they were profitable with someone wanting to purchase them. So I'd say you were doing pretty doggone good to make it to that particular point.
It's always a combination of luck and skill, right? So and I go back to Microsoft. I mean, I didn't even understand or realize. I mean, the tools that you've got today that restaurant chains have today when it comes to the analytics of locations, like a Starbucks, for example, they could do an overlay of a territory and tell you exactly where those Starbucks need to go based on traffic patterns, demographics, income levels, and psychographics as well. Where are people coming from and where are they going to when they enter and exit a particular DMA? So I didn't have that. I was just driving around looking for locations.
Well, I would say that at the time that you started off, they didn't have those sets even in corporate America, because I started off with Kentucky Fried Chicken in the training department in 1976. And later on became a franchise business coach at the end of my career, which was around 1983, 84, before I became a franchisee. And we used to do this study just by getting out there, physically driving, counting cars, and going to the Department of Transportation to see what the traffic things were. So I'd still say you're way ahead of your time there.
Yeah, I always say, you can keep your analytics.
Yeah.
Get me to a site. Let me be there. Let me talk to the neighboring businesses and get to know the area a little bit, because that's something that those analytics will never tell you.
Never. Yep. What the spendable income is and all those kinds of things. Because as you know, traffic patterns change like that, especially today with all the development and everything going on.
For sure.
So, So we go into corporate America. You start, you start working there. You bring that skill set from being an entrepreneur yourself, which gives you a little more insight in corporate America as to what to look for, how to help that type of person out. Walk us through what happened to your career, how you went along there.
Yeah, I mean, so that was a bit of a challenge, right? Because here I was running my own show, and now I'm in a situation where, hey, listen, you got to follow. I found myself initially questioning, well, why are we doing it this way? Because I think it would be easier and better if we did it this way, right? That's a tough mindset to just break out of when you're used to just making the decisions, and those decisions are the way we're going to do it from this point on, to now okay, you're in a structured environment. Now you've got to follow those SOPs and follow the systems and the rules. And, that was a bit of an adjustment. That was a bit of a challenge for me initially, for sure.
Yeah. So at that particular time, were you working with franchisees in your early beginnings?
So, what we did at my training store, I had the training location for Red Robin. We trained franchisees that were coming through the system. So in this particular case, it was really important for me to, teach what I preach, right? And preach what I teach. I got to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Right.
And if you deviate from that, then, well, I always say, when you make, for those of us old enough to remember a Xerox machine, right? When you make a copy of that first original, it comes out crisp and clear, right? Wow, that can't tell the difference, right? Now, if you make a copy of that copy, well, you start losing some of that resolution, right? And then you start making a copy of a copy. Wow, you could barely recognize it at all from the original, right? So when you're training franchisees to be general managers within their new location or owners in their new location, really important that you keep that original as crisp and clean as possible, right? You don't want to start making a copy or taking any shortcuts in any of the training, checking all the boxes. That's the key for success. Yeah, as you know, a franchise chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly.
That customer who's visiting a location in Topeka, Kansas one day has a lousy experience. Well, now they're in your market and they go, yeah, I'm not going there. I had a terrible experience there.
Right. Yep. It's funny you mentioned that, because not that particular part of it, but the franchisees, owners that you're training, that, it's kind of tough to teach a millionaire who has made money to adapt the ABCD of how this operated SOPs and how it should operate, because their mind's rolling and they're only looking at, okay, how much money am I going to make? They're not interested in that ABCD, the following the steps. The one thing that I had going for me when I was in training, Robert, along the time, was I had the colonel himself that was a part of the training, and so his word was law. It went beyond, but once he left, it fell upon me to keep that momentum going. But I can only identify with some of the challenges you were having at that particular time.
Yeah, I could tell you that there were some tough conversations at times, right? I mean, I'd have to pull some of these people out of the restaurant and sit down with them and say, hey, look, you can't be aloof, in this, I understand you've been awarded a franchise, and that's the terminology I would use. And there's a big investment at stake, but I've got to see that you're absorbing the information that I'm training. I'm not saying that you've got to be an expert at any particular position within that restaurant, right? However, it's really important for that owner to be able to, if nothing else, gain the respect of his staff within that restaurant, to be able to talk the talk and walk the walk, get into that position and wrap that burger properly in the case of Red Robin, so it's smiling when you serve it to the customer, right? So it's, because now that owner is being looked on as, you don't want your staff to look at you as some millionaire who doesn't need this, because then they're not going to respect you. Right? Mm-hmm. You've got to get that respect, and or the area manager. And in one case, I remember that area manager was the guy's son, and the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. So those are some tough conversations as well, right? I mean, those are you got to build. Respect is earned. They're just not going to give it to you, and from working with people cooking on a line, they won't have it. When you're in the middle of a $2,000, $3,000 hour, you got to keep your nose down and you got to get things done, right?
Yeah.
And they can't have some spoiled brat barking stuff at them.
Yeah. So you mentioned this, and I start having visions of, going through that, where the owners of the restaurants, some of these owners that I dealt with, that did not want to go behind the counter and go into the kitchens and go into the different areas to get dirty, or to even just pepping up some of their employees. And the very point that these employees were somewhat insulted by that and didn't give their top performance. A lot of them take off vacationing and so forth. But that is the key. The franchisees that were able to do a mix of behind the counter, working with their employees and motivating their employees, and on the other side, being able to work with the guests and customers that were coming in and letting them know that they appreciate their dollars that they're spending, and keeping that part of the restaurant clean, restrooms all the way out to the parking lot, is key to success. Because as you just mentioned, that one experience, if a customer has that one experience, it affects the whole market, so that's key.
And it's a tough business, it's, and it's a domino effect, in a restaurant. One thing happens, one thing goes wrong, and before you know it, it starts tumbling forward, and you start losing track of seconds, right? Because that's really what the business comes down to, is pennies and seconds, right? So when you start losing track of a few seconds here and a few seconds there, all of a sudden your ticket times are ballooning out of control. In your case, you've got cars stacked up on the drive-through, and not a good situation. Those cars on the drive-through are trusting that you're going to get them through there in a timely manner. And if they start losing that trust in you, well, they're going to go to Burger King next time.
Yeah. The drive-through is a separate business. I mean, it's another business in itself, and being able to making sure that you understand that whole operation, meaning being able to take the customer's orders, to make sure they stayed in the line and the line didn't get too long, as well as getting them through in the appropriate amount of time. So that's very interesting. So you're doing this now, working with the franchisees and training them and so forth. What was the next step in your career?
Yeah, so I along with Red Robin, I should say, between Red Robin and Einstein Brothers, I got my deli yayas out, I guess is the best way to say it. An opportunity came up literally next door to where I was running my Red Robin. And it was a managing partner opportunity with what was considered to be the first real New York style deli that was going to open in the Seattle market. So I jumped on that opportunity, and it certainly gave me that chance to kind of exercise that entrepreneurial spirit again. Although we were associated with the delicatessen out of Detroit, we were a standalone for the most part out there. So I was a managing partner there for a few years, and then went on to Einstein Brothers and oversaw the Northwest for Einstein Brothers, Seattle and Portland. And then an opportunity came up down here in South Florida to get really more immersed into franchising. And that was to become director of franchise development, and then eventually the vice president of franchise development, sticking in the restaurant world, and was there for about 12 years. And so that was a great experience. Was able to understand real estate more deeply than I had before, and understood the technology for site selection a little bit better, because I did a lot of development on the development side, and really got to work with a lot of our existing franchisees and developed relationships with new franchisees as an operation, on the operations side, not in the kitchen. I was no longer, in the kitchens and participating in that part of the business, but that kind of prepared me for what I'm doing today. It's although that was also a challenge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Switching from the franchise development side for a franchisor to being a franchise consultant broker, as I am now, what I do now is similar, but it's very different. right? So my role as a consultant is to learn, understand, coach, advise, advocate, not sell, right? Because I don't sell franchises. I represent franchises. I have 800 or so under contract in my portfolio, but the right fit for a franchise candidate that I'm working with, it could be in any of the 37 sectors that I have access to, and any of those 800 brands that are within those sectors. So my role is to really first get to know and understand what makes that candidate tick, what goals and what needs they have, as well as their financial and time capacities. So once I have all that information, then I'm able to really research the right fit for what's going to float their boat.
So the brands that you work with now, how much or how involved are you in those individual brands as to understanding how they work and what their demands are, what their franchisee model would be of the candidate that they're looking for?
See, that's the advantage I have as from being on the franchisor side, I develop relationships with those franchise developers within all of these brands. So I have a direct line contact information for any brand rep that I want to have a conversation with to learn more. And before that even happens, I'll share the business profile that I've built for that candidate with the brand rep, so we can really discuss whether or not that opportunity is the right fit for them. But it also gives them the opportunity to really understand what that model looks like, how it operates. And my role is then to present, educate the candidate from a 30,000 foot view. I don't want to steal all the thunder from the brand. I give them just enough information, and I always tell them why I'm presenting this, why this is a good fit for them before they get into process with the brands. I just want to pique their curiosity and get them interested. Yes, this looks like it could be a good fit for me. That's my green light to get them introduced to the brand.
Okay, so you get the franchisee or the potential franchisee first, and then you take them to the different brands of which ones that would fit their profile. Now, question, those prospective franchisees that are maybe not franchisees yet, but wanting to become franchisees, are these brands that you deal with, or, it used to be, I don't know if it's changed today, but it used to be if you were in the chicken business, let's say KFC, then KFC didn't want a franchisee that was involved in other chicken businesses or other businesses that are selling 20% of the same particular product. Is that part of your selection process?
So I'll say that the vast majority of the candidates that I work with right now are executives looking to transition out of their roles for a variety of reasons, whether it's, hey, I see the writing on the wall and my time here is coming to an end. I'm hitting a glass ceiling. I've got golden handcuffs on and I need to see what else is out there. I want to pave the path to my exit. That's the vast majority of the people that I'm working with right now, that they want to escape from corporate America. These are people that have it up to here with dealing with their bad bosses and those son-in-laws that I mentioned earlier, and wanting to go out and do something on their own. And typically these people are young enough to take off. There's enough runway left for them to take off and build something that's meaningful over the next 10-year period. And most franchise agreements that I deal with are about 10 years in length.
Would those be called license agreements?
You could call it a license agreement as well. I mean, as a franchisee, you are a licensee, right?
Yeah. Well, most franchises that I'm familiar with and this is on the street, brick and mortar, that have contracts are usually 20 years, 25 years with a rollover of another 5 years, et cetera, if they're performing well, et cetera. Most license agreements that I've dealt with, such as Starbucks that we deal with, is a 10-year agreement. That's why I asked what the difference might be.
Yeah, the brand, most of the, I should say 99% of the brands that I work with are franchises. They have franchise agreements, and those agreements are 10 years in length, renewable. Now,
Okay.
I know, there are a lot of restaurant brands in particular that have a 20-year agreement in place, and that's for a variety of reasons. It's a larger investment, to start there.
Yeah.
The investment level that I'm falling into with most people right now is anywhere from 100,000 up to 400,000, right? Anywhere in that range. So opening up a restaurant, a freestanding building, drive-through, you're talking about $1 million plus now.
At least, yes. So, I'm sorry, I forgot we were talking about multiple different kinds of franchises versus the restaurant business. And that's why I was honed in on that. Do you help from the standpoint of them getting the financing?
Yeah, actually, I do. I have. So one of the benefits that I bring to the equation are all the resources that I have access to, one of which are funding resources. So I have access to, if people, for example, want to go for a traditional SBA type of a loan, and there's several SBA type loans in that category, I certainly have a couple of avenues for them to explore there. A lot of people are also doing what's called a rollover for business startup, or a ROBS, where they're leveraging their monies, their investments in their 401k, not using them, they're leveraging them. So they're essentially changing the C Corp that oversees that 401k to their business entity. And now those funds become the part of that new C Corp.
Okay. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you have in this whole concept that you have going on? And I'm asking you that from the standpoint of some of the challenges you've overcome, as well as as our listeners out there that may see this as an opportunity and something you say may be something that interests them to reaching out to you.
Yeah, so I would say, from a broker perspective, I would say the biggest challenge that we face as an industry is really finding candidates that are serious about wanting to explore franchise business ownership as a path for them. So I get a lot of people that I talk to throughout the course of the week that are not yet ready. And there are a variety of reasons why somebody's not ready to embark on that journey, because it's time consuming, right? As I mentioned, so as a broker, I'm only earning a living when I make a placement. I'm very similar to a real estate broker. So I have to be careful with who I spend a lot of time with, because that's a time investment into somebody that may not be ready. So I've got to get to that pretty quickly in the process. And so obviously there's a series of questions that are asked in that initial conversation to gauge their readiness to embark on the journey, as I call it, because it does take months and it's a sizable investment. And a lot of times these people are first-time business owners. So they're not, they've got fear, that F word that we can say out loud. It's that would be probably tangentially to, finding the right prospects, the right candidates, getting past that fear, right? Getting to the other side. And I always tell candidates, all the things you want in life are just on the other side of that fear. But you've got to see it, right? So these days, the fear can be assuaged through what we call validation, right? So any of my candidates, any franchise candidate will have the opportunity to speak directly with current franchise owners to validate the brand, to see how they are getting support, whether or not they're getting support, good support from the franchisor, what their unit economics are, what their ROI was, how long did it take them to get to break even, all the financial important questions, right? What other business model can you do that with other than franchising? You have that opportunity. I mean, when you're going out to find and you're ready to buy an existing business, right? Maybe one that isn't part of a franchise system, but it's been operating well. You're not going to have franchise support once you open that business or once you take it over from the current owner. You're not going to have a franchise system to lean on, because that's the other nature of a franchise system, is that it's typically a very collaborative culture environment. So you have the opportunity. Everybody's going through the same aches and pains, ups and downs, highs and lows as you are, right? So you do have that system in place as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you on the other side of the equation with the license, with the franchisor, is, excuse me, what do you look for in the franchisor as far as resources that would be able to help this particular franchisee be successful, such as training, research and development, marketing and advertising, local and national advertising, those resources that this particular franchisee can tap into?
I'll tell you the first resource that I go to before I even consider educating one of my candidates on any brand, and that is I go to the franchise disclosure document. Because that franchise disclosure document, it tells you everything you need to know about that brand, the support, the guidance, what they're providing, what they expect of you. And it also gives you item 20, right? So item 20 tells you if the system is growing or it's shrinking, and what their retention rate is over the prior 3-year period. So if they're showing retention rates less than 80 or 85%, and they're shutting down franchisees, you have to scratch and go, what's going on here? Why is that happening, right? So I also look at other maybe less popular sections of the FDD. I'll look at item 3, which is litigation. I'm not an attorney, right? I'm going to put that out there. And that's another resource that I provide when somebody's ready to pull the trigger. I introduce them to an attorney that specializes in franchise law so that they can give it the once over to make sure it makes me feel better. And I always say it's the best $1,500 that you're going to spend. Peace of mind. They're going to detail the good and the bad and the indifferent that they see in that agreement and the FDD. But I look at item 3, not from a legal perspective, but I look at it because I want to see what kind of litigation. Do they have 4 pages of lawsuits against them?
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't look so good, right? I also look at the experience. Item 2, I want to look at the people running the show. I want to see what their backgrounds are, what their experience is, right? Because that'll also tell me what kind of hands this company is in.
Yeah. Robert, I tell you that the FDD is that's the Bible. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I hope that our audience out there hear that loud and clear, because that is the very first thing that you really want to get to understand what's going on with that particular brand. Yeah. So that's good. So you get past that and you got a good candidate. For you in particular, it's important that you have success, that these two groups work together, franchisee, franchisor. Do you take hands off at that particular point, or is there a certain amount of time you stay with them?
Yeah, so the resources I mentioned are a very important value that I bring to the equation, and I only can provide those resources if I stay attached to the candidate throughout the process. So I know where they're at in terms of the process, the discovery process with the brand, right? So, for example, I know at some stage, whether it's after the second call, third call, every brand's a little different. they're going to be provided with this FDD, which is this 3, 4, 500-page document, and I have to prepare them for that if the brand hasn't already prepared them for it. That's a pretty big document to receive, right? And they're asking you to sign something. Whoa, what am I signing? So what I do is I have a resource that I've created that breaks down the FDD in very digestible terms, right? Every item spelled out in a summary so that you're not overwhelmed. And I always say, I don't need you to look at the legal language of that FDD, but when you have your FDD review call with the brand, here's some of the things that you can press on. Here's some items that you can discuss. And if they don't already discuss them with you, take them there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to answer your question. It's important for me to continue to advocate and provide resources to my candidate. Remember, that candidate, I built trust and rapport with that person initially, right? So it's not, I'm handing them off and I'm trusting that the brand is going to do the right thing and a good job with that candidate. And they're not going to make me look like I have egg all over my face.
Right. Yes. Great. The service that you provide is so warranted. In the state of Florida, just talk about Florida, there are a lot of professional athletes that live in this area, make this their home 6 months out of the year at least, and always approaching me about getting into franchising and so forth. Your source, what you do, I think would be a tremendous avenue for some of these guys and girls that are looking to get into. Can you walk through your website or how some of these potential athletes might get involved, and also you'll be able to tell them, what they're actually getting into?
Yeah. So and I appreciate you saying that, because athletes are an important part of franchising right now. And I spent some time at a concept called Stretch Zone, which is right here in Fort Lauderdale, their headquarters. They brought me down there about 6 weeks ago, and I spent the day with their executive team and got to know the brand really well. One of their franchise owners is a guy by the name of Drew Brees, and his locations are in New Orleans. And he's not only an owner, but he's also kind of the face. He's kind of an advocate and a spokesperson for the brand. Athletes, especially when you've reached the pinnacle, right? Once you've reached that professional level, well, that's a different person, right? That's somebody that's extremely driven and understands what hard work is going to get you, right?
Yep.
So that's first and foremost. But aside from that, well, they're used to being coached. They're used to following a playbook.
Exactly.
These are all important traits when it comes to being a franchise business owner, right? So, bestfranchiseoptions.com is my website. And it's a great way for somebody to really peruse all that I do. And most importantly, there's a small little section in there somewhere, which is the entrepreneurial assessment. That's the first step with me, right? So that business assessment will tell us, among other things, what your level of risk tolerance is. It will also tell you what your work competencies are, along with what culture organization you're a good fit for. A lot of really good franchisors that I work with will actually look at this assessment when you get to that stage and see how that candidate stacks up to the highest performing franchise owners within their system. So they're taking a very scientific approach. They're not guessing at it. They're taking a scientific approach and saying, you know what? This candidate, wow, they really match up well with our highest performers. This candidate could be in the top 10% of our system in terms of performance.
Yeah. One of the most successful professional athletes that has been in the franchising business that I'm aware of, he recently passed, Junior Bridgman. out of Louisville, Kentucky, and Junior and I were partners with Wendy's in the Tampa area. And a lot of guys that have looked at franchising as an opportunity want to get in, but they want to get in with 500 restaurants. They want to get in with, and I tend to tell them it's not so much as how many restaurants you have, is how successful you can be with one, with 10, with the small number, and build a successful team. Junior started off with 4 restaurants, 4 Wendy's in the Detroit area, Chicago area, and starting his business, but and being successful, he attracted opportunities to grow, not only as a professional athlete, but also as a franchisee. So what would you say to some of the guys from the standpoint of wanting to come in and own a bunch, or just come in and start off small?
Well, truth be told, and I'm going to have a confession to make here, I stay away from food and beverage these days.
Okay.
Just because I know the dirty underbelly of the business and truly how challenging a course that is, right? It could be really rewarding, but in my opinion and in my experience, there are, I'm not going to say easier ways to earn capital outside of the food and beverage sector.
Okay.
Opportunities that don't require that type of retail space environment, right? Because, now when you're signing a franchise agreement, whether it's 20 years or 10 years, now you've got an obligation to that franchisor for that period of time. And all those obligations are spelled out and they're clear. And if you leave early, they're going to hit you with some penalties. It's in there, that's in all franchise agreements. On top of that, if you're going to start looking at getting into retail space in a retail environment, now on top of that obligation to the franchisor, you've got to sign a lease with some personal guarantees, potentially, most likely, to that landlord for that same 10 or 20-year period. So now you've got 2 layers of risk that you're having to take on. So I gravitate towards opportunities, for the most part, that are very scalable, that can do extremely well in any economic environment, recession resistant, have recurring revenue. Maybe they're contracted, maybe they have national contracts in place already, and one that doesn't require that retail space. Some could be run out of a home office or an executive space office, a lot less exposure there, or light industrial, a lot less expensive, less obligation as well. So that's what I tend to gravitate to, just to kind of reduce a lot of the risk from it.
Mm-hmm. That's outstanding. That's a different way to look at it. As a food and beverage franchisee for so many years, that my mind tends to stay in that particular arena. But what you've just mentioned is really another opportunity that some of our folks, our listeners, might look into. Yeah.
Yeah. There's most people that are going into business for their first time tend to want to take less risk, right? They want to be risk averse. And so, for example, you could have 5 restaurants, and they could, 2 of them could be performing well, right? So your EBITDA line may hover around 20%, which you're laughing and celebrating if you're at 20% EBITDA in the restaurant business right now. Once everything's taken out above that, anything below EBITDA. 3 of those restaurants, the other 3, well, you could have one that's just burning cash. So now you've got one of the 2 that's performing well, having to float one that's not performing well, right? So it becomes a kind of a danger. I have a very close friend, and I golf with him every week, and he used to own a restaurant, and he used to brag to me all the time, oh, Robert, my restaurant's going to do 1.8 million this year. And I would say, wow, that's great. So what's the profit? There's no profit. He's just talking about top line.
Yes.
I don't care about top line. I do not care about top line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me what's coming down to the bottom.
Yeah. That's the key. That's what keeps it going. That bottom line. I really appreciate having this conversation. It's music to my ear. It's what I've done the last 40 plus years of my life. And so to hear the experiences that you've had and what you're doing today, that probably opens up the doors to a lot of our listeners that may be looking to get into franchising, that go into some of these different meetings that you have. You said you have some meetings coming up that some folks might like to attend.
Yeah, so one meeting that we have coming up is a regional event, but that's really focused for us brokers to get together and meet with specific brands. We were just earlier this week in Dallas in one of these events, and that's just an opportunity to kind of rub elbows with the franchisors that are there sponsoring the event, but also a good way to collaborate with the other brokers that are there and learn new and different, maybe better ways to do what we do. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I mean, I could talk to you. I'm sure we could talk for hours just about restaurants and all the stories that we can share, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you being on the show, and certainly hopefully we can stay in touch. And because I come into contact with a lot of guys, I have been on the board of the NBA Retired Players Association, was chairman of the board at one particular time, and now still belong to the membership committee and helping some of our guys figure out which different avenues to pursue. So certainly those that hear the show and we share on our social media, some of the guys may reach out. You've enlightened us with a lot of great information. Wish you all the success in the world moving forward. And do you get back to Long Island, to that area anymore?
Yeah, I haven't been back to Long Island in a while. Now I gravitate towards the city because that's where most of my friends ended up, some in one of the boroughs. So I gravitate towards the city mostly, or up in Boston. And heck, it's pretty nice down here in South Florida this time of year. And you're probably having some great weather where you are as well.
Yeah, we are. We have restaurants in Miami and Miami Airport. We have 21 locations there. So down in that area quite a bit. My son, we've transitioned. My son now is taking over. So that's up to him to stay on top of things. But we get down that way quite a bit. Yeah. So
yeah, I'd love to talk to you about airport locations. That's a whole different show and a whole new topic. And those can be really fruitful. Yeah. Who's running the concession down there now?
Well, there's a number of different master concessionaires down there, but we're in partners with HMS Host. Yeah, down in that area, and also in Tampa, Florida, and also up in Louisville, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So we've been in the airport business since 1995, where we opened a TGI Fridays in the Tampa airport that became #1 in the nation for 9 years in a row. So we had a great start into the business there, and I fell in love with it. It happened during the O.J. Simpson chase. And I actually bid on the RFP. We lost it watching the chase, and I said, "Hey, he's having a lot worse than we are." But right after that, an opportunity opened up for me to go out and get a TGI Fridays franchise, and we opened one right there in the main concourse that became very successful.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Great to hear that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Robert, and wish you all luck. And certainly this podcast will be airing soon, and all your social media information that we'll be tagging it, and we'll move on from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, George. I appreciate your time as well.
Yes, sir.
This has been Catch as Catch Can. The game isn't over. Your success story is just getting started. Head to tinsleyspeaks.com for exclusive content, resources, and opportunities. Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr., a production of Live Stream Editors.